In a small countryside town surrounded by lush green hills and vast open fields, there lived a man named Richard Langley. He was known far and wide for his immense wealth, extravagant lifestyle, and his passion for rare and exotic animals. Among all his prized possessions, none were as talked about as Midnight Fury, a magnificent black stallion with a coat that shimmered like silk under the sunlight. The horse had been imported from a distant land, famous for its beauty, strength, and untamed spirit. But despite its striking appearance, Midnight Fury had earned a reputation for being impossible to tame. Midnight Fury wasn't just any ordinary horse. His piercing eyes seemed to carry an ancient wisdom, and his powerful frame commanded respect. Trainers from across the country had come to Richard's estate, eager to take on the challenge of breaking the stallion's wild nature. Some used force, others tried tricks, but none succeeded. Midnight would rear up, kick violently, and sometimes even charge at anyone who dared approach him. Many left bruised and defeated, muttering words like impossible and unbreakable. Richard, however, found amusement in these failed attempts. Watching trainers struggle only added to his belief that Midnight Fury was special, a creature too noble to be controlled by mere humans. Richard's mansion stood atop a hill overlooking the sprawling property, which included stables, gardens, and endless pastures. On weekends, he often hosted lavish gatherings where wealthy friends, business associates, and curious locals would come together to enjoy fine wine, gourmet food, and stories of his latest acquisitions. One such evening, as guests mingled in the grand hall adorned with chandeliers and expensive art, the conversation inevitably turned to Midnight Fury. Someone mentioned the horse's name, sparking laughter and exaggerated tales of how yet another trainer had been thrown off balance during their attempt to tame him. Richard chuckled along, clearly enjoying the attention his prized possession brought him. As the night wore on, a quiet knock came at the front door. The butler opened it to reveal an elderly man standing outside. He was dressed simply and worn out, trousers, a faded shirt, and boots caked with dirt. His face bore the lines of years spent working outdoors, and his hands were rough and calloused. This was Thomas Greaves, a local farmer who had lived in the area for decades. Though not rich or influential, Thomas was well respected by those who knew him. People admired his calm demeanor, practical wisdom, and deep connection to nature. When asked why he had come, Thomas explained that he had heard about Midnight Fury and wanted to offer his help in taming the horse. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into laughter. Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting between disbelief and amusement. "You?" he said finally, his voice dripping with mockery. "An old man like you thinks you can succeed where professionals have failed?" The guests joined in, some giggling behind their hands while others outright guffawed. It seemed absurd, this frail-looking farmer claiming he could handle a beast that had baffled experts. Yet, amidst the ridicule, there was something about Thomas's steady gaze and unwavering confidence that caught Richard's attention. Perhaps it was curiosity or boredom, or maybe just a desire to see what this unlikely challenger would do next. Whatever the reason, Richard decided to give Thomas a chance. "All right," Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. "Go ahead, and try if you think you're up to it. But don't blame me when things go wrong." There was a hint of condescension in his tone, but also a flicker of intrigue. After all, failure after failure had made Midnight Fury a spectacle, and Richard couldn't resist the idea of adding another chapter to the saga. If nothing else, watching Thomas fail would provide entertainment for his guests. Little did anyone know. This decision would set off a chain of events that would leave everyone speechless, and teach them lessons they would never forget. Thomas didn't react to the laughter or the skepticism. Instead, he nodded politely and stepped outside, his posture straight and determined. As he walked toward the stables where Midnight Fury was kept, whispers followed him. Some wondered if he truly believed he could succeed, while others dismissed him as foolish. But Thomas paid no mind to the chatter. For years he had worked closely with animals, understanding their instincts, fears, and desires. To him, every creature, no matter how wild, had a soul that yearned to be understood. And Midnight Fury, despite his ferocity, was no exception. When Thomas reached the stable, he paused for a moment, listening to the sounds of hooves stomping against the wooden floor and the occasional snort echoing through the air. Inside the enclosure, Midnight Fury paced restlessly, his muscles tense and his ears flicking back and forth. Even from a distance, the horse exuded power and unpredictability. Most people would have hesitated, perhaps reconsidering their decision to step closer. But not Thomas. With slow, deliberate movements, he opened the gate and entered the pen, carrying nothing more than a small bag of oats and a worn leather halter slung over his shoulder. The atmosphere changed instantly. Spectators gathered around the fence, drawn by a mix of morbid curiosity and genuine interest. They expected chaos, the kind of dramatic scene that usually unfolded whenever someone dared approach Midnight Fury. Horses like him weren't meant to be tamed easily, especially not by someone who looked so unassuming. Yet, as Thomas moved closer, something remarkable happened. Instead of charging forward or rearing up, Midnight stopped dead in his tracks, his nostrils flaring as he locked eyes with the old man. For several moments, neither moved. It was as if time itself had frozen, leaving only the rhythmic sound of breathing to fill the silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, Thomas extended his hand, offering a handful of oats. Midnight hesitated, his eyes narrowing suspiciousness. But then, to everyone's astonishment, the horse lowered his head and sniffed Thomas's palm. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Midnight cautiously took the food, his lips brushing gently against Thomas's fingers. It was a fleeting moment, yet it carried profound significance. In that single act, a bond began to form, a connection based not on dominance but on trust. While the audience murmured in disbelief, Thomas remained calm, stroking Midnight's neck with a tenderness that spoke volumes about his understanding of the animal's spirit. What unfolded next was nothing short of extraordinary. Over the course of the following days, Thomas continued visiting the stables, spending hours each day with Midnight Fury. Unlike previous trainers who relied on whips, chains, or harsh commands, Thomas approached the horse with patience and kindness. He spoke softly, using words that seemed meaningless to human ears but carried weight in the language of animals. He fed Midnight treats, groomed his coat until it gleamed, and allowed the horse to grow accustomed to his presence without pressure or fear. Slowly but surely, Midnight began responding. At first it was subtle, a slight relaxation of his stance, a softening of his gaze. But soon, the changes became undeniable. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Thomas arrived at the stables, carrying the same weathered halter. By now, Midnight recognized him, greeting him with a gentle nicker instead of hostility. Without hesitation, Thomas slipped the halter over the horse's head, and to everyone's amazement, Midnight didn't resist. He stood still, allowing Thomas to adjust the straps as if he understood the purpose behind the action. Word of this breakthrough spread quickly, drawing larger crowds to witness the transformation firsthand. Even Richard, who had initially scoffed at Thomas's efforts, found himself intrigued. Skepticism gave way to fascination as he watched the once unruly stallion respond to the farmer's touch with surprising compliance. By the end of the week, Thomas had achieved what many considered impossible. He had earned Midnight Fury's trust. The horse followed his lead willingly, walking alongside him without resistance. Some spectators whispered that it was magic, while others credited Thomas's unique approach. Whatever the explanation, one thing was clear. Midnight Fury was no longer the untamable beast he had once been. As the days passed, Thomas Greaves continued his work with Midnight Fury, and the transformation became more evident with each passing hour. People from the nearby town began arriving at Richard Langley's estate, eager to see the progress for themselves. Word had spread quickly about the elderly farmer who had somehow managed to connect with the wild stallion. Some came out of curiosity, others out of disbelief, but all left deeply moved by what they witnessed. It wasn't just that Midnight Fury was calmer now. It was the way he seemed to respond to Thomas. not out of fear, but out of genuine trust and respect. Every morning, Thomas would arrive at the stables with a bag of oats slung over his shoulder and a quiet confidence in his step. He never rushed or forced anything. Instead, he let Midnight set the pace, allowing the horse to grow comfortable in his presence. Sometimes, Thomas would simply sit near the enclosure, talking softly as if sharing secrets only the two of them could understand. Other times, he would walk slowly around the paddock, letting Midnight follow him at his own will. There were no loud commands, no raised voices, just a steady rhythm of patience and care. To those watching, it felt almost magical, like Thomas had unlocked a hidden door to the horse's soul. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light across the fields, Richard decided to test how far this newfound bond had developed. He approached Thomas, who was brushing Midnight's coat with slow, deliberate strokes. "I want to see what you've really done," Richard said, his tone a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. "Can he carry a rider? Can you ride him?" The question hung in the air, heavy with anticipation. Riding Midnight Fury bareback was considered an impossible task, even for experienced equestrians. The horse had always resisted saddles, let alone riders, bucking off anyone who dared climb onto his back within seconds. Thomas paused for a moment, his hand resting on Midnight's neck. Then, without hesitation, he nodded. "All right," he said calmly, as if agreeing to take a casual stroll rather than attempting something so daring. Richard's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the old man's willingness. He quickly gathered a group of spectators, including friends, staff, and curious townsfolk, all eager to witness the moment. Whispers filled the air as people speculated whether Thomas truly believed he could succeed, or if he was simply too proud to admit defeat. The following morning, the crowd gathered near the paddock where Midnight Fury awaited. The horse stood tall and proud, his dark coat gleaming in the sunlight. His ears twitched as he sensed the excitement around him, but his gaze remained steady, locked onto Thomas. Slowly, the old farmer approached the enclosure, opening the gate, with the same calm assurance he had shown since day one. He stepped inside, ignoring the murmurs of the onlookers. For a few moments, he stood still, gazing into Midnight's eyes as if silently communicating something only the two of them understood. Then, with deliberate movements, Thomas placed one foot against the fence railing and hoisted himself onto Midnight's bare back. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. No one dared blink as Midnight shifted beneath Thomas, his powerful muscles tensing. Everyone expected the horse to rear up, buck violently, or bolt forward in a fit of rage. But instead, Midnight stood still, his breathing steady, his body relaxed. Thomas leaned forward slightly, whispering something close to the horse's ear. And then, with a sudden burst of energy, Midnight took off, galloping across the open field with breathtaking speed. The crowd erupted into cheers and exclamations, their voices blending with the thunderous sound of hooves pounding against the earth. Midnight raced across the landscape, weaving between trees, leaping over fences, and splashing through shallow streams. Yet, despite the horse's incredible speed and agility, Thomas remained perfectly balanced, his posture relaxed and confident. It was as if man and beast had become one, moving in perfect harmony. Not once did Midnight show signs of resistance or rebellion. Instead, he responded to Thomas's subtle cues, turning left or right, slowing down or speeding up, as if reading the old man's thoughts. When they finally returned to the paddock, the audience erupted into applause, their earlier doubts replaced by awe and admiration. Thomas slid off Midnight's back, patting the horse affectionately on the neck. Midnight lowered his head, nuzzling against Thomas's shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes about the bond they shared. Richard, who had watched the entire scene unfold with wide eyes, stepped forward, shaking his head in disbelief. "How did you do it?" he asked, his voice tinged with both wonder and humility. Thomas smiled, his weathered face glowing with quiet pride. "It's not about breaking them," he explained, his words simple yet profound. "Horses are like people. They need trust, respect, and care. You can't force something as noble as a horse to obey you. You have to earn their loyalty." His explanation resonated deeply with everyone present, including Richard, who realized how misguided his earlier arrogance had been. For years he had viewed animals as possessions to be controlled, but Thomas had shown him a different way, a path built on understanding and mutual respect. From that day forward, Richard treated all his animals differently. He hired trainers, who shared Thomas's philosophy, prioritizing compassion over control. And as for Midnight Fury, he became more than just a symbol of wealth or power. He became a living testament to the idea that even the wildest spirits could be tamed, not through force, but through love and patience. The story of Thomas and Midnight spread far beyond the countryside town, inspiring countless others to rethink their relationships with the creatures they cared for. But perhaps the most remarkable change occurred within Richard himself. Once, known for his arrogance and materialistic pursuits, he began using his wealth to support causes that promoted kindness toward animals. He funded shelters, sponsored educational programs, and even opened a sanctuary for horses like Midnight Fury. Though he never admitted it aloud, many believe that meeting Thomas had profoundly impacted him, teaching him lessons about humility, empathy, and the true meaning of connection. As for Thomas, he returned to his quiet life as a farmer, content in knowing he had made a difference. He didn't seek fame or recognition. His reward was the bond he had formed with Midnight, and the knowledge that he had inspired others to see animals in a new light. Occasionally, Richard would visit him, bringing gifts or updates about the stallion. Their conversations often revolved around horses' nature and the importance of treating all living beings with dignity. Over time, their unlikely friendship grew stronger, proving that sometimes the greatest transformations happen not just in animals, but in people too. And so, the tale of the millionaire, the elderly farmer, and the untamed stallion became legend. A story passed down through generations, reminding everyone who heard it that true strength lies not in domination, but in the ability to connect, to listen, and to trust. The weeks that followed Thomas Greaves's success with Midnight Fury brought about a quiet but profound change in the countryside town. People couldn't stop talking about what they had witnessed, the way an elderly farmer had tamed a horse that no one else could. It wasn't just the act itself that fascinated them, it was the lesson behind it. Thomas had shown everyone that kindness and patience could achieve what force and arrogance never could. For many, this realization sparked a shift in how they viewed not only animals but also their fellow human beings. Richard Langley, who had once laughed at Thomas's offer, found himself reflecting deeply on his own life. He had always prided himself on his wealth and power, believing these things made him superior. But watching Thomas work with Midnight Fury had humbled him in ways he hadn't expected. Richard began spending more time around the stables, observing how other horses responded to different approaches. He noticed how fear and aggression often led to resistance, while gentleness and understanding created harmony. Slowly, he started applying these lessons to his interactions with people as well. He became less demanding of his staff and more willing to listen to their ideas. His friends noticed the change too, remarking on how much calmer and more approachable he seemed. Meanwhile, Midnight Fury continued to thrive under Thomas's care. The stallion's once ferocious demeanor softened further, replaced by a calm confidence that made him even more majestic. He no longer paced anxiously in his enclosure or snorted angrily when strangers approached. Instead, he carried himself with grace, greeting familiar faces with a gentle nicker. Visitors to Richard's estate were often invited to meet Midnight, and they left amazed by the horse's transformation. Some even claimed they could feel the bond between Thomas and Midnight, a connection so strong it felt almost tangible. One day, as Richard stood watching Midnight graze in the field, he turned to Thomas and asked, "Do you think anyone else could have done what you did?" Thomas chuckled softly, leaning on the fence beside him. "Anyone can do it," he replied. "But it takes time and heart. Most folks don't want to wait, though. They're looking for quick fixes, easy answers. Horses don't work like that. Neither do people." His words lingered in Richard's mind long after their conversation ended. They reminded him of his own impatience, not just with animals, but with life itself. He realized how often he had sought shortcuts, expecting immediate results without putting in the effort required to truly succeed. Inspired by Thomas's philosophy, Richard decided to make some changes on his estate. He hired new trainers who shared the same values, emphasizing compassion over control. These trainers worked closely with the horses, taking the time to build trust, rather than resorting to harsh methods. Under their guidance, even the most difficult animals began to show improvement. The stables, once filled with tension and frustration, now buzzed with a sense of calm and cooperation. Even the workers seemed happier, knowing they were part of something meaningful. Word of Richard's transformation spread quickly, drawing attention from beyond the town. Journalists and animal enthusiasts came to interview him, eager to learn more about the man who had gone from mocking an elderly farmer to embracing his teachings. Richard welcomed them warmly, using the opportunity to share Thomas's story and promote the importance of treating animals with respect. He spoke passionately about the lessons he had learned, urging others to adopt similar practices. His speeches resonated with many, inspiring listeners to rethink their own relationships with animals. Thomas, however, remained humble despite the growing recognition. He declined interviews and refused to take credit for anything extraordinary. "I didn't do anything special," he would say whenever someone praised him. "I just listened to the horse, that's all." His modesty only added to his charm, making him a beloved figure in the community. Locals often stopped by his farm to seek advice, whether about horses, farming, or life in general. Thomas always obliged, offering wisdom in his straightforward, yet insightful way. As months passed, Midnight Fury became a symbol of hope and redemption, not just for Richard and Thomas, but for everyone who heard their story. Children in the town began learning about the stallion in school, hearing tales of how patience and kindness had transformed a wild spirit. Teachers used the story to teach valuable lessons about empathy and perseverance. Even artists were inspired, creating paintings and sculptures of Midnight Fury to celebrate his journey. The horse's image appeared everywhere, from local murals to charity events, reminding people of the power of understanding and connection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Richard invited Thomas to join him for dinner at the mansion. It was a rare occasion. Thomas usually preferred the simplicity of his farmhouse to the grandeur of Richard's estate, but tonight he accepted, curious about what Richard wanted to discuss. Over a meal prepared by Richard's finest chefs, the two men talked about everything from farming techniques to childhood memories. Eventually, the conversation turned to Midnight Fury. "I owe you a lot," Richard said, raising his glass in a toast. "You didn't just change my horse, you changed me. I don't know if I've thanked you enough for that." Thomas smiled, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "What matters is what you do next. Keep helping others see the value in kindness. That's the best way to repay me." Richard nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he still had much to learn, but he was determined to continue growing, both as a person and as a steward of the land. After dinner, the two men walked outside, where Midnight Fury stood, grazing beneath the stars. The horse lifted his head as they approached, his dark coat shimmering faintly in the moonlight. Richard reached out tentatively, placing a hand on Midnight's neck. To his surprise, the horse didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into the touch, closing his eyes contentedly. In that moment, Richard felt a deep sense of peace, a reminder of how far they had all come. As the night grew cooler, Thomas bid Richard farewell, promising to return soon. Watching the old farmer walk back toward his truck, Richard couldn't help but smile. Though their lives were vastly different, they had formed a bond rooted in mutual respect and admiration. And through Midnight Fury, they had discovered something greater than wealth or fame: the enduring power of trust and compassion. Back at his farm, Thomas sat on the porch, gazing up at the starry sky. He thought about the journey he and Midnight had shared and how it had touched so many lives. Despite the attention and praise, he felt no different than before. To him, the true reward lay not in recognition, but in knowing he had made a difference. As he sipped his tea and listened to the crickets chirp in the distance, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the horse, for Richard, and for the countless others whose hearts had been opened by their story. And so, the legacy of Thomas. Greaves and Midnight Fury lived on, spreading far beyond the hills and fields of their small town. Their tale served as a timeless reminder that even the wildest spirits can be reached, not through domination, but through love, patience, and understanding. As autumn settled over the countryside, painting the trees in shades of red and gold, Richard Langley found himself hosting another gathering at his estate. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Gone were the loud laughs and boastful conversations about wealth and power. Instead, the air buzzed with quieter, more meaningful discussions about kindness, patience, and the lessons learned from Midnight Fury's transformation. People came not just to enjoy Richard's hospitality, but also to see the horse who had become a symbol of hope for the entire community. The centerpiece of the event was, unsurprisingly, Midnight Fury himself. The stallion stood proudly in the paddock, his sleek black coat catching the soft glow of the setting sun. Guests gathered around, marveling at how calm and majestic he appeared. Children pressed their faces against the fence, giggling as Midnight nudged Thomas's hand for treats. Even those who had doubted Thomas in the beginning now spoke of him with admiration, calling him a wise and remarkable man. Richard watched all of this unfold with a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that the changes he had made on his estate were rippling outward, touching lives far beyond what he had imagined. During the evening, Richard took a moment to address the crowd. Standing near the paddock with Midnight by his side, he shared the story of how Thomas had changed everything, not just for the horse, but for him personally. "I used to think I knew it all," Richard admitted, his voice steady but sincere. "But Thomas taught me that real strength doesn't come from control or force. It comes from understanding, respect, and love." His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement. Some even wiped away tears, moved by the honesty in his speech. Afterward, guests lingered, sharing their own stories of how the tale of Midnight Fury had impacted them. A young woman recounted how she had adopted a rescue dog after hearing about Thomas's approach, vowing to treat the frightened animal with patience rather than frustration. An older man spoke of mending his strained relationship with his son, inspired by the idea that trust takes time to build. Each story added another layer to the legacy of Midnight and Thomas, proving that their influence extended far beyond the boundaries of the estate. Meanwhile, Thomas remained as humble as ever. When people thanked him or praised his work, he simply shrugged and said, "It wasn't me, it was the horse. He showed us what he needed, we just had to listen." Despite his modesty, everyone recognized the profound effect he had on those around him. His quiet wisdom and unwavering compassion reminded people of the importance of slowing down, observing, and truly connecting with others, whether human or animal. As the weeks turned into months, Richard continued implementing the principles he had learned. He expanded his efforts beyond the stables, turning parts of his vast property into sanctuaries for neglected and abused animals. These areas became safe havens where creatures could heal and thrive under the care of compassionate handlers. Word of these initiatives spread, drawing volunteers from neighboring towns and cities. Families brought their children to visit, teaching them the value of empathy and responsibility. What began as a personal journey for Richard soon blossomed into a movement, inspiring countless others to follow his example. One particularly cold winter morning, Richard received an unexpected visitor, a struggling farmer named Jacob Carter. Jacob had heard about Richard's animal sanctuary and hoped to find help for his aging plow horse, Daisy. Years of hard labor had left Daisy weak and lame, unable to work any longer. With mounting debts and no resources to care for her, Jacob faced the heartbreaking decision of selling her to a slaughterhouse. Desperate and out of options, he traveled to Richard's estate, hoping for a miracle. When Richard met Jacob, he saw the desperation in the man's eyes and immediately understood his plight. Without hesitation, he offered to take Daisy in, promising to provide her with the care she needed. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Jacob broke down in tears, thanking Richard repeatedly. As Daisy was led into the sanctuary, Richard couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for the hardships so many farmers endured. It motivated him to do more, not just for animals but for the people who depended on them. Inspired by this encounter, Richard launched a new program aimed at supporting struggling farmers. He partnered with local organizations to offer financial assistance, training, and resources to those in need. Through this initiative, dozens of families received help, allowing them to keep their farms running while ensuring their animals were treated humanely. Once again, Thomas played a key role, offering advice and sharing his knowledge of sustainable farming practices. Together, they created a network of support that strengthened the entire community. Back at the sanctuary, Daisy slowly regained her strength under the care of skilled veterinarians and handlers. Her recovery mirrored Midnight Fury's transformation, a testament to the healing power of compassion and dedication. Visitors often stopped by to check on her progress, cheering when she took her first tentative steps without pain. For Jacob, seeing Daisy happy and healthy brought immense relief and joy. He visited regularly, bringing updates on his farm and expressing endless gratitude to Richard and his team. Through all these efforts, Richard discovered a deeper sense of fulfillment than he had ever known. Money and luxury no longer defined his success. Instead, he measured it by the smiles on people's faces and the wagging tails of rescued animals. His friends noticed the change too, commenting on how much happier and more grounded he seemed. Some even joined his cause, donating funds or volunteering their time to support the sanctuary. The ripple effect of kindness continued to grow, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. Thomas, meanwhile, remained a steady presence in Richard's life. Though he still lived modestly on his small farm, he frequently visited the estate to check on Midnight Fury and offer guidance whenever needed. Their friendship deepened over time, built on mutual respect and shared values. They often spent hours talking about the future, how they could expand their efforts, reach more people, and create lasting change. Both men understood that their work was far from finished, but they faced the challenge with optimism and determination. One crisp spring morning, as wildflowers began blooming across the fields, Richard organized a special event to celebrate the sanctuary's achievements. Hundreds of people attended, including farmers, volunteers, and families who had benefited from the programs. There were speeches, performances, and tours of the facility, giving everyone a chance to see firsthand the impact of their collective efforts. At the heart of it all stood Midnight Fury, now a beloved ambassador for the cause. Children lined up to pet him, their laughter filling the air as he nuzzled them gently with his velvety nose. As the day drew to a close, Richard stood beside Thomas, looking out over the crowd. "We've come a long way," he said softly, his voice tinged with emotion. "And yet, there's still so much to do." Thomas nodded, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "That's the thing about kindness," he replied. "It never stops growing. As long as we keep planting seeds, someone will always reap the harvest." His words stayed with Richard long after the celebration ended, reminding him of the endless possibilities ahead. In the years that followed, the legacy of Midnight Fury and Thomas Greaves continued to inspire. Schools incorporated their story into curriculums, teaching students about empathy and perseverance. Artists created works honoring their journey, capturing the essence of trust and connection. And communities across the region embraced the philosophy of compassion, creating their own initiatives to support animals and people in need. Through it all, Richard and Thomas remained steadfast allies, united by a shared vision of a better world. Though neither man sought recognition, their actions spoke louder than words. They had shown that even the wildest spirits, whether horses or humans, could be reached through love and understanding. Their story served as a timeless reminder that true greatness lies not in domination, but in the ability to connect, to listen, and to care. And as long as people remembered that lesson, the spirit of Midnight Fury and Thomas would live on, guiding generations to come. As the years rolled on, the bond between Richard Langley and Thomas Greaves grew stronger, becoming a cornerstone of their lives. Though they came from vastly different worlds, one of wealth and privilege, the other of simplicity and hard work. They found common ground in their shared mission to make the world a kinder place. Together they worked tirelessly to expand the sanctuary, turning it into a haven not just for animals but also for people seeking refuge from life's challenges. The once exclusive estate, known only for its luxury, transformed into a vibrant hub of compassion and community. Richard often marveled at how much his life had changed since meeting Thomas. Once driven by ambition and material success, he now found purpose in helping others. His days were filled with meaningful tasks, meeting with farmers, planning new programs, and caring for the animals that called the sanctuary home. He no longer felt the need to prove himself through wealth or status. Instead, he measured his worth by the smiles on children's faces and the wagging tails of grateful dogs. It was a shift that brought him immense peace, though it hadn't come without its challenges. There were moments when old habits threatened to resurface. Occasionally, Richard caught himself slipping back into his former ways, impatient with delays, frustrated by setbacks, or tempted to take shortcuts. But each time he reminded himself of Thomas's teachings: patience, persistence, and trust. These lessons weren't always easy to follow, but they became guiding principles that shaped every decision he made. And whenever doubt crept in, he looked to Midnight Fury, whose presence continued to inspire everyone around him. Midnight Fury, now older and slower, still held an aura of majesty. His once wild spirit had softened over time, replaced by a calm wisdom that seemed almost human. Visitors to the sanctuary often remarked on how gentle he had become, marveling at the way he interacted with children and newcomers. Despite his age, Midnight remained a symbol of hope, a living reminder that even the most untamed hearts could be reached through kindness. For Richard, seeing the horse thrive was proof that their efforts were making a difference. Thomas, too, continued to play a vital role in the sanctuary's success. Though he preferred working behind the scenes, his influence was undeniable. His quiet guidance helped shape the sanctuary's philosophy, ensuring that every animal received the care and respect it deserved. He also mentored young volunteers, teaching them the importance of listening, not just to animals but to people as well. Many of these volunteers went on to pursue careers in veterinary science, conservation, or social work, carrying Thomas's lessons with them wherever they went. One summer afternoon, as golden sunlight bathed the fields, Richard approached Thomas with an idea. "What if we wrote a book?" he suggested, excitement lighting up his face. "A book about Midnight Fury, about you, about everything we've learned. It could inspire even more people." Thomas chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Books are your world, not mine," he replied. "But if you think it'll help, go ahead. Just don't make me sound like some kind of hero." Richard laughed, knowing there was truth in Thomas's modesty. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that their story needed to be told. With Thomas's blessing, he began jotting down notes, recounting the events that had led to Midnight Fury's transformation and the ripple effect it had created. He included anecdotes from visitors, quotes from volunteers, and reflections on his own journey. As the manuscript took shape, it became clear that this wasn't just a story about a horse. It was a story about connection, resilience, and the power of compassion. The book, titled Midnight's Legacy, was published the following year. To Richard's surprise, it quickly gained popularity, resonating with readers across the globe. People were drawn to its simple yet profound message, that understanding and kindness could overcome even the toughest obstacles. Schools adopted it as required reading, using it to teach students about empathy and perseverance. Animal shelters and charities embraced it as a tool to promote their causes, and countless individuals wrote letters expressing gratitude for the inspiration it provided during difficult times. For Thomas, the attention brought by the book was both humbling and overwhelming. Reporters flocked to his farm, eager to interview the man who had tamed Midnight Fury. Fans sent gifts and letters thanking him for his wisdom and humility. Yet, despite the acclaim, Thomas remained unchanged. He continued living his quiet life, tending to his crops and caring for his own animals. When asked about his newfound fame, he simply smiled and said, "I'm just a farmer. The real heroes are the ones doing the work every day." Back at the sanctuary, life carried on as usual. New animals arrived regularly, each with its own story of hardship and survival. Some were abandoned pets left to fend for themselves on the streets. Others came from abusive situations, bearing scars both visible and invisible. Under the care of dedicated staff and volunteers, these animals slowly healed, regaining their trust in humans and rediscovering joy. Watching their progress filled Richard with a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. One particularly memorable arrival was a scruffy little dog named Lucky. Found wandering along a highway, Lucky was emaciated and terrified, flinching at every sound and refusing to make eye contact. It took weeks of patient effort to earn his trust, but eventually Lucky began to open up. He started wagging his tail, playing fetch, and cuddling with anyone who showed him affection. His transformation became a favorite story among visitors, proving that even the most broken spirits could heal with love and time. As the sanctuary grew, so did its impact on the surrounding community. Local businesses began partnering with Richard to support the cause, donating supplies or hosting fundraisers. Schools organized field trips, giving students hands-on experience in animal care and environmental stewardship. Families volunteered together, bonding over shared acts of service. What had started as a personal project had blossomed into a movement, uniting people from all walks of life under a common goal. Despite the sanctuary's success, Richard never forgot its roots. Every milestone, every rescued animal, every volunteer trained, every program launched, was a testament to the lessons he had learned from Thomas and Midnight Fury. On quiet evenings, he often sat by the paddock, watching Midnight graze beneath the stars. Sometimes Thomas joined him and they would sit in companionable silence reflecting on how far they had come. "You know," Richard said one night, breaking the stillness, "I used to think I was the one helping these animals, but really, they've been helping me all along." Thomas nodded thoughtfully, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "That's the thing about giving," he replied. "It doesn't just change the ones you're helping, it changes you too." Their conversation lingered in Richard's mind long after they parted ways. It reminded him of why he had started this journey, to create a better world, not just for animals but for himself and everyone else involved. And though challenges lay ahead, he faced them with renewed determination, knowing that every step forward mattered. Years later, when Richard looked back on his life, he realized how much Midnight Fury and Thomas had shaped it. They had taught him the value of patience, the strength of vulnerability, and the beauty of connection. Through their example, he had discovered a deeper purpose, one rooted in love, kindness, and service. And while he knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, he walked it with gratitude, knowing he was part of something greater than himself. Even as Midnight Fury grew older and frailer, his spirit remained unbroken. He continued to greet visitors with warmth, embodying the resilience and grace that had defined his life. And though the day would eventually come when he could no longer run across the fields, his legacy would endure. In the stories told, the lessons learned, and the countless lives he had touched. For Richard and Thomas, their partnership was a testament to the power of collaboration. Together, they had shown that true greatness wasn't about individual achievements but about working toward a shared vision. Their friendship, built on mutual respect and shared values, inspired others to reach across divides and find common ground. It was a lesson they hoped would resonate for generations to come. And so the story of Midnight Fury, Thomas Greaves, and Richard Langley lived on, not just in books or memories, but in the actions of those who carried their message forward. Their tale served as a timeless reminder that even the wildest spirits could be tamed, not through force but through love and understanding. In a world often divided by differences, it offered a glimmer of hope, a belief that kindness could bridge any gap and heal any wound. As the seasons cycled through their endless rhythm, the sanctuary founded by Richard Langley became more than just a place. It became a symbol of hope and transformation. People from all over the country visited, drawn not only by the animals, but also by the stories of redemption and healing that unfolded there. Each visitor left with something intangible yet profound, a renewed belief in the power of kindness, and the possibility of change. For many, it was a life-altering experience, one that inspired them to carry the spirit of the sanctuary back to their own communities. Richard, now older and grayer, spent most of his days walking the grounds, checking on the animals, and talking with volunteers. His once luxurious lifestyle seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the simple joys of watching a frightened puppy wag its tail for the first time or seeing a rescued horse take its first steps toward freedom. He had traded expensive suits for worn boots and dirt-streaked jeans, and he wore his new role with pride. Though some of his old acquaintances teased him about his rustic appearance, Richard didn't care. He had discovered a happiness far richer than anything money could buy. Thomas Greaves, too, remained a constant presence at the sanctuary, though his visits grew less frequent as age began to slow him down. Still, whenever he arrived, he brought with him an aura of calm wisdom that everyone cherished. Volunteers sought his advice, children adored his gentle demeanor, and even the animals seemed to perk up at his arrival. Despite his advanced years, Thomas continued to share his knowledge freely, teaching others how to listen, not just to animals but to people as well. His lessons were simple yet transformative, reminding everyone that understanding came before action. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves swirled in the breeze and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke, Richard received a letter that stirred deep emotions within him. It was from a young woman named Emily, who had visited the sanctuary years earlier as a troubled teenager. In her note, she described how meeting Midnight Fury and hearing Thomas's story had changed her life. At the time, she had been struggling with feelings of worthlessness and isolation, convinced that no one cared about her. But seeing how patience and compassion could transform even the wildest spirit gave her hope. Inspired by what she witnessed, she decided to turn her life around. Now, years later, she was happily married, working as a counselor, and volunteering at a local animal shelter. Emily's letter touched Richard deeply, reinforcing the idea that their work extended far beyond the physical boundaries of the sanctuary. Every person who walked through its gates carried a piece of its philosophy with them, spreading ripples of kindness into the world. Letters like Emily's reminded Richard and Thomas why they had dedicated so much of their lives to this cause. They weren't just saving animals. They were planting seeds of empathy and resilience that would grow for years to come. As winter approached, bringing frosty mornings and shorter days, Midnight Fury's health began to decline. The once mighty stallion moved slowly now, his coat duller and his movements stiffer. Yet, despite his frailty, his eyes still sparkled with intelligence and warmth. Visitors often stopped by to visit him, marveling at how such a fierce creature could exude so much gentleness. Children whispered secrets into his ears, while adults rested their hands on his neck, finding comfort in his steady presence. Even in his twilight years, Midnight Fury continued to teach lessons of grace and dignity. One evening, as snow began to fall softly over the fields, Richard stood beside Midnight in the paddock. The horse lifted his head slightly, gazing at Richard with an expression that seemed almost human. "You've done so much," Richard said quietly, his breath visible in the cold air. "You've shown us what it means to trust, to forgive, to heal. I don't know if we'll ever see another like you." Midnight snorted softly, leaning into Richard's touch. It was a moment filled with unspoken gratitude, a final acknowledgement of the bond they shared. The next morning, Midnight Fury passed away peacefully in his sleep. News of his death spread quickly, drawing mourners from near and far. Some came to pay their respects, others to share memories of how the horse had impacted their lives. A small ceremony was held in his honor, with Richard delivering a heartfelt speech about Midnight's journey and legacy. "He wasn't just a horse," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was a teacher, a healer, and a friend. Through him, we learned that even the wildest hearts can be reached with love." In the weeks that followed, the sanctuary felt different without Midnight's towering presence. Yet his influence lingered in every corner, from the rescued dogs playing in the yard to the volunteers tending to injured birds. His story continued to inspire, reminding everyone that true strength lay not in domination, but in connection. To honor his memory, Richard commissioned a statue of Midnight Fury, placing it near the entrance of the sanctuary. Inscribed on the base were the words, "Kindness conquers all." With midnight gone, Richard and Thomas focused their energy on expanding the sanctuary's reach. They launched educational programs aimed at schools, teaching children about animal welfare, environmental conservation, and the importance of empathy. These initiatives proved wildly successful, sparking a wave of interest among young people eager to make a difference. Many students returned to volunteer during holidays, bringing their families along to experience the magic of the sanctuary firsthand. As spring returned, painting the landscape in vibrant colors, the sanctuary welcomed a new group of residents. Abandoned calves, injured deer, and stray cats found wandering the countryside. Among them was a spirited young colt named Shadow, whose resemblance to Midnight Fury was uncanny. Like Midnight, Shadow had a fiery spirit and a tendency to resist authority. Watching him reminded Richard of those early days with Midnight, and he couldn't help but smile. Perhaps Shadow would become the next ambassador for the sanctuary, carrying forward the legacy of his predecessor. Thomas, though slower now, took a special interest in Shadow, spending hours each day building trust with the colt. Just as he had done with Midnight, he approached Shadow with patience and care, letting the horse set the pace. Over time, Shadow began to soften, responding to Thomas's gentle touch and quiet words. It was a process that required immense effort, but both men knew it was worth it. Shadow's transformation would serve as yet another reminder of the power of compassion, a lesson the world desperately needed. By summer, the sanctuary buzzed with activity. New volunteers arrived daily, eager to contribute to its mission. Families picnicked under the shade trees, children laughed as they played with puppies, and elderly visitors sat quietly, watching the animals graze in the fields. The sense of community was palpable, a testament to the bonds forged through shared purpose. Even those who had never met Midnight Fury or Thomas Greaves felt the weight of their legacy, carrying it forward in their own unique ways. For Richard, the sanctuary represented everything he had worked for, a living embodiment of the values he had come to cherish. It was a place where broken spirits could heal, where fear could be replaced with trust, and where love could conquer even the toughest challenges. He often thought about how different his life might have been if he had never met Thomas or Midnight Fury. Would he still be chasing wealth and status, blind to the deeper meaning of life? He didn't know, and he didn't want to find out. What mattered was the present, the sanctuary, and the countless lives it touched. As the sun set on another day, casting long shadows across the fields, Richard stood beside Thomas, looking out over the land they had transformed together. "Do you think we've done enough?" Richard asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Thomas chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Enough isn't something you measure," he replied. "It's something you keep doing. As long as there's love in your heart and work to be done, you'll always have enough." Those words stayed with Richard long after Thomas left for the evening. They encapsulated everything he had learned over the years, that life wasn't about reaching a destination but about embracing the journey. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring challenges, he faced them with courage, knowing he wasn't alone. Together, with the help of friends, family, and strangers alike, they would continue building a better world, one act of kindness at a time. Years later, when Richard looked back on his life, he realized how much Midnight Fury and Thomas Greaves had shaped it. They had taught him the value of patience, the strength of vulnerability, and the beauty of connection. Through their example, he had discovered a deeper purpose, one rooted in love, kindness, and service. And while he knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, he walked it with gratitude, knowing he was part of something greater than himself. Even as Midnight Fury's memory lived on in statues, books, and stories, his true legacy resided in the hearts of those he had touched. His journey reminded everyone that even the wildest spirits could be reached through understanding and compassion. And in a world often divided by differences, it offered a glimmer of hope, a belief that kindness could bridge any gap and heal any wound.